We don't do that here.
That's not my department's responsibility. It's just another set of problems.
What happens when it goes wrong?
Are just some of the things that people say when they're faced with the prospect of a smart building. You're listening to Smart Thinking, a podcast from WSP. I'm Matthew Marson, taking you on a journey into smart buildings. In this episode, we look at the complexities of creating a smart building and the pitfalls to be avoided. Smart, evolvable buildings integrate intelligent design, multiple data inputs, and previously disparate systems that aggregate these into a cloud of useful information. When harnessed, this actionable intelligence allows smart owners and occupants to create more engaging and effective built environments. In fact, truly smart buildings maximize the value of each and every square meter. There are 8 reasons why smart buildings can, if not executed correctly, go wrong. Firstly, there's the skill gap. There's people, devices, standards, connectivity, security challenges, big data, and analytics. Firstly, when we consider the skills gap, often when it comes to smart buildings, there's no real formal training. It hits a lot of different markets and crosses traditional siloed boundaries. In fact, you need a plethora of skills from across the business, operations, and engineering to really make that successful. And if you consider how construction projects are managed using a traditional waterfall system where delivery has to happen one stage after another, that kind of misaligns with how software engineers work in more agile methodologies where different buckets of functionality don't necessarily go in the order that you would expect them to be delivered. If you think about people as well, in a smart building, sometimes they can be afraid of the new technology. They're concerned that it'll be watching them and that their privacy might be at risk. Some essentially don't like change or new ways of working. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about the business value and the imperative for why somebody would do that. Thirdly, let's think about devices. They give you additional overhead during your life cycle of the building. It fundamentally changes how you manage your assets. Sometimes there are difficulties with standardizing the onboarding process for those IoT or Internet of Things devices, and the protocols in which they speak are different from those that facility managers are most comfortable with. Fourthly, if we think about the standards, we need to shift towards more open source standards with the appropriate bodies and their supporting open protocols. Most often, we're locked into a particular vendor, and legacy means that we have to stay a part of that ecosystem. And we also need to declare who owns the data, particularly when you're in a multi-tenanted building. In terms of connectivity, moving forward, we need to make sure that we design our networks so that they're converged, but also segmented using software. This means that although you have only one physical infrastructure, you can essentially run it as if it were multiple separate networks. This is really good for ensuring cybersecurity. In fact, we need to also start having more control on the profiles that we give to devices, so that if we expect them to speak across the network in a certain way and they change their behavior, we can identify any security breaches. Number 6 is security challenges. As with everything, backdoors exist, and we need to mitigate against those sorts of risks. Perhaps that's through software-based rules and device profiling. Maybe it's just having a commitment to ensure that you roll out updates and are really conscious about security within your organization. Or perhaps it's having the need for encryption or certificate-based authentication across your network. Next up, it's big data, and that changes the way that you might architect your systems within your business. If that's having an API-based architecture, having a set of globally accessible protocols, making sure that your organization has a really strong data etiquette, and having consistent relationships and schema. And finally, it's analytics. Start with a use case defined approach for data matching, such that if you know you're after a particular thing, then you can go and design the exact system to support what you're after, rather than worrying about how you tie it all together at the end. In my opinion, I think we should start with a visual design first, because it's visuals that really help explain the outcomes of some of this technology. And finally, have a lightweight display method, so you don't have a set of really complicated applications that are difficult to unpick later. The end-to-end process for delivering a smart building is really quite complex. Once you've kicked off your project, we all need to be singing from the same hymn sheet, and that's having a shared vision. Maybe even producing an experience design so we can understand how people are going to feel in the space or what they're going to say about it once they've left. Having a strong strategy, modelling out those business cases to ensure that the technology is going to have proper business outcomes for you, and then understanding the devices and machines that you need to select, how you're going to connect them together, how that data is going to be processed, particularly for resilience. What sort of platforms are you going to use? What are your big data methods that are going to make this successful, particularly when you start to render that on an application? Are there any other systems within your business that you should be integrating? For instance, if we can compare the amount of daylight in a space to how often people sit at their desks, or even the outcomes that they deliver, that would be really valuable. How about the user interfaces that you need to see and provide value to the normal folks that are using the building? Then, once you're ready to go, how will you deploy and commission some of this hardware? How will you test it to make sure it's successful? Have you considered the change management that you're going to have to put in place, or perhaps even the support model to help both your OT and IT folks work together? And finally, how can you continue to drive success through the operations phase? Smart buildings often run into challenges, but if you can get a smart building right, then it will be transformative in terms of the outcomes that it delivers for your people, your profits, and the environment. Join us in our next episode with special guest Cameron Mazami and find out why he thinks buildings of today are the cars of yesterday. If something in this episode has piqued your interest, then have a chat with us. Email smart@wsp.com. You've been listening to Smart Thinking, a podcast from WSP. I'm Matthew Marson, and thank you for listening.